What's up, guys? I'm Lucas and welcome back to Terracotta Aquarium. Today I wanted to do an 8-month update on Cory Mountain. So the first video that I made on this channel was about this tank, and it looked a lot different when I did. It has grown in significantly since then. The plants are thriving, the fish are thriving, everything is going great. And in this video, I just wanted to sort of talk about where my head's at with it now, address some of the previous concerns I had in the first video, and just give a overall update. If you haven't seen the first video where I talk about this aquarium, you can check it out. There's going to be a link probably over there. Go click it, and you can see sort of the transformation from then to now. So I set this tank up around 2 months or so before I made that first video, something like that. And yeah, it was really fun to sit down and talk about the aquarium, and that's why I'm still making videos and doing this kind of thing now. I really enjoy this aspect of the hobby. Just a little backstory on this aquarium. This is actually the second aquarium that I've ever set up. Basically, the first aquarium I had, I wasn't really happy with how it looked, and it was like just a huge learning process for me, as I'm sure most people's first aquarium is. I learned a lot about water chemistry, water parameters, etc., and I'm still learning a lot, and this tank has taught me a lot through the whole 8-month process of getting it to where it is now. So I'm really grateful to have this tank in my life. It's right in the sort of center of my living room. I eat breakfast and look at the tank, sit in front of the tank all the time. I can sit on my couch, which is sort of behind me over here, and stare up at it when I'm watching TV and that kind of thing. So it is a huge just source of joy for me in my house. And I hope that that's true for most people who have aquariums. But my first aquarium was not that way, which is why I wanted to start over. That aquarium kind of gave me a lot of stress, unfortunately, through the learning process. And I got to a point where I knew that I needed to start over. So the honey gouramis in here, Clementine and Marmalade, they were in that first tank, and they actually were thriving in there. There was one night where I accidentally forgot to plug in the heater, or not the heater. I forgot to plug in the filter overnight, and so there was no flow. And they took that opportunity to just breed like crazy. So they were thriving in there. They're thriving in here too, but they started out in that tank. So did all of the Corys that are in here. Basically, I set up this tank, transferred the community that I had into the old tank into here. And yeah, that was about 8 months ago. At the end of the day, I am grateful for that first aquarium, because without that kind of experience, I couldn't have gotten to where I am here with this aquarium. So despite that aquarium being a source of stress, it bred something that is a stress reducer and makes me happy every single day. But yeah, that's a little bit of a story of what led me to starting this aquarium. And as I said, it's been about 8 months, and everyone in here, plants and animals, they are doing absolutely great. So first, yeah, let's talk about the inhabitants. As I just mentioned, we've got 2 honey gouramis, Clementine and Marmalade, and they've been doing great. I think they've been trying to breed, and you might be able to see right now, Clementine has actually been working on a bubble nest that keeps getting kind of moved around just from the flow of the tank, but I think that they really want to breed. I think it doesn't help that I periodically clear out the floating plants, and that sort of disrupts Clementine's kind of mating rituals of creating the bubble nest, because honey gouramis are kind of similar to betta fish in that they have like a labyrinth organ. So they breathe at the top and they create a bubble nest just like betta fish do. but they're doing great. They love to hide in the jungle that this tank has become. Marmalade spends a lot of her time back kind of underneath the filter outlet over here. And then Clementine's territory is on this side. And Clementine even has a little cave that he likes to go into occasionally. But, you know, they'll come kind of towards each other, butt heads a little bit, do a little bit of a mating ritual, maybe chase each other around a bit, and then go their separate ways. But they're doing great. Their colors look absolutely beautiful in this tank. And yeah, honestly, they're my two favorite fish that I have. They're just so cute. And they've been with me for a long time at this point. Over a year. I mean, I've been doing aquariums like this only a year and a half, maybe a little bit more now, something like that. And they've been with me for the majority of that time. So they make me really happy, and I'm super grateful for them. The Corys in here have been with me actually longer than Clementine and Marmalade. And they're doing awesome. They especially love how dense the plant growth is in here now. They spend a lot of their time in this area, kind of, you know, underneath the stems and the grasses, foraging and doing their kind of thing. They obviously come out for feeding time, but they're a little bit skittish when you see them in this front area of the tank. But I love them. Corys in general, I just think are so adorable. And I'm really happy to have a little group in here and also in the other tank. And I guess in the future, I'm planning to kind of merge those two tanks into one bigger piece in my new apartment or house, because I'm moving in a couple of months. So I'm going to have to figure out how to move, at this point, 5 aquariums. So wish me luck with that. But yeah, the Corys are doing great. They are stir-by Corys, and they're actually locally bred in my area. So it's kind of cool to have fish that are locally bred in the aquariums here. There's something about that makes me happy. And then the other fish in here are these pork chop rasporas. And they spend most of their time underneath the filter outlet here, sort of hiding in the plants. And they get pretty ravenous around feeding time. They'll come up and jump and do that kind of thing. And their colors are super vibrant. It's mostly pork chops, and then there's a couple threadfin rasporas in here, which look super similar, but they're just like a little bit more silvery. But they're doing great. They were the latest addition to the tank, and I think they went in 5 or 6 months ago, like pretty soon after I started the tank. I think that they were in my first video on this tank, if I'm remembering correctly. But for the plants, as you can see, everything has just kind of exploded, and it really is like just a true jungle at this point. The plants that have been doing the best are the dwarf sag, which, as you can see, it's not so dwarf anymore. It is reaching all the way up to the surface of the tank. And I mean, I've tamed it a little bit. Basically, when I want to do like a new setup and I want dwarf sag, I come straight to this tank and just take out a clump or two. And it does really well in the water here. Does well in all my tanks. I've never had a problem with it. Like if I was going to recommend a plant to beginners, it would probably be dwarf sag, because it'll just take off. Before you know it, you're going to have just a ton of free plants, basically. But the other plant that's doing super well that I started with just like one bunch of it, and it has just totally taken off, is the Vallisneria spiralis, which is these long leafy stems all over the backgrounds. And yeah, just like the dwarf sag, it's reaching all the way up to the surface. I've been in a constant process of trimming and replanting it, just all in the background, and it has really filled out the tank super nicely. And I guess I'll talk about the other plants first, but I realized why the Vallisneria spiralis is doing so well after I read the Wallstad method. But I'll talk about the other plants first, and then we'll get to that. So the Java fern in the center here, which I love the look of, it has been slowly chugging along. I think there's some sort of deficiency in it, because it has like a ton of spots, and there are places where the leaves have started to break down. And I don't know if that's just, well, honestly, I don't know why that is. There could be some sort of deficiency that I'm not aware of with the brown spotting on the leaves. And if you guys have any insight into why that would be happening, please let me know. I add fertilizer to the tank once a week, sometimes once every other week at this point. So I feel like it should have all the nutrients that it needs. So I'm at a little bit of a loss. But yeah, in the comments, let me know if you guys have any suggestions for Java fern. But there is also a decent amount of Bacopa sort of in the background, a little bit sort of in the mid-ground here. And yeah, that's been doing super well too. That's another plant that I take trimmings of pretty frequently for other tanks. And yeah, it's gotten up to the surface a couple times, and I've cut it back, replanted. It's a little bit hard to see. You kind of have to look closely into the background to see the Bacopa. It's kind of obscured by all the leafy, grassy plants at the moment. There's also a decent amount of Ludwigia sort of sprinkled around here. And the Ludwigia, like it's definitely growing. It's growing a little bit kind of, not super fast, I guess is what I'm trying to say. There's a couple types. I have one Ludwigia that is red. Actually, there's a couple trimmings of it. And I think that the Ludwigia is really just not getting enough light due to the other plants and the floating plants, that kind of thing. So it's there, not growing super well, but it is what it is. I'm just kind of letting it do its thing. And there's also this piece of Anubias barteri, which when I put this in the tank, I didn't really know what I was doing in terms of growing Anubias. So part of the rhizome is actually planted. But despite that, it's growing pretty significantly. It's chugging along in this little corner here. I think it looks really cool. So yeah, happy about that. Nothing is going wrong with that Anubias. And let's see, what else? I did add a good amount of plants to this tank in a previous video a few weeks ago that were from Aquarium Co-op, and link to that video here. But I added some Rotala Hra, and you can see it's kind of died back. It's lost a lot of leaves. I'm not sure if it's going to survive. I again think it's kind of just getting choked out by the other more dominant plants in here, and it's just not getting the nutrients or the light that it needs. There is, on this side, there is like one stem that's growing and kind of shooting up and holding on to that red color. So who knows? Maybe it'll survive and I'll be able to take some cuttings of it. The one that I put in the back, sort of behind everything, it's there, but it's gotten really leggy and it really just has leaves at the top. So not great. Unfortunately, the micro sword that I planted all in the foreground, a lot of it died back, and it's really, it's struggling for sure. But I think at this point, I'm not really going to add any plants or remove any plants. Again, I'm moving in 2 months. So I'm just going to kind of let everything go, honestly. Just let it go and just see how jungly it gets before I have to move. But it's going to be crazy when I eventually have to break down this tank, which will be kind of sad. But I'm going to have basically a massive harvest of dwarf sage, Vallisneria spiralis, all of this kind of stuff. And I'm really excited to kind of really see how many plants are in here and then add those to a new setup. Oh, and I guess one thing for the inhabitants I forgot to talk about is the snails. You'll see that there are a ton of snails in here. And I've been feeding a little bit more than I used to, after reading the Walsad method, I learned a lot about how food, like fish food, can basically become plant food. So I started feeding a little bit more than I normally would, and that kind of caused the snail population to explode. But that's fine. I mean, I like snails. I think they're cool. They eat up all of the uneaten food. They, clean the glass a certain amount and keep the place cleaner. I mean, there's a ton of them, but I don't know. I don't think they're like an eyesore or anything. They're snails. They're cool. They're part of the environment, the ecosystem that I have here. So last thing for the plants is you'll notice I no longer have the piece of pothos that was right here growing out of the center of the tank. It kind of stopped growing, and it was basically just like a little bush here that was sending out a ton of roots, but no more leaves were growing. And some of the leaves were actually starting to die back. So I figured it's seen its time in the sun, and I took it out. I think it just didn't really have a way to grow towards the edges of the tank, and that caused the leaves to just kind of die. So I've got this other piece of pothos that's actually growing out of this tank over here. And I'm hoping that it'll kind of just drape over the lights a little bit and maybe put some roots into the aquarium. We'll kind of see how that progresses. But I got this new little plant over here. This is a cutting of a Thai constellation monstera. Maybe cutting isn't the right word, but it's a baby Thai constellation monstera. And I put this initially on the center here, and it was like right up against the light. So I decided to move it to the corner. And since I did that, it's actually got a new leaf coming off. I think it's going to be a beautiful little plant. I mean, it's going to take forever to grow to the size of the other monsteras that I have. But I think when it does, it's going to be so cool. And it's going to be so much fun to raise a little plants from baby into giant. So I'm excited about that one. It's going to be cool. This is another sort of project I've started for the next tank that I do in my new place, where I have like a massive tank. I want to get one that's the size of this whole table, basically. But yeah, no more pothos. Now we have the monstera and this other pothos. So for the maintenance for this tank, I did a water change last week, but honestly, I've been doing water changes maybe once every 2 months. I've done less than 10, in the time that I've had this tank set up. And I mean, everything's been fine. The water parameters have been absolutely pristine. I just do a water change every so often just to make sure there's no buildup of any elements that I'm not testing for, that kind of thing. And yeah, I mean, it's been so stable. The fish are so healthy. Plants are doing great. So there just hasn't really been a need for it. It's more of just like a precaution, basically. And for other maintenance, I mean, I've cleaned out the filter for this tank once in the last 8 months, and it's been chugging away. It's an Oase Biomaster 250 thermo, so with a heater included. And I'll come in and do a little bit of algae scraping on the glass, maybe once every 3 weeks, something like that. I'll come in with my toothbrush and get out some of the algae that's growing around the base of the plants. And that is one thing that I've been battling with this tank for months on end, is a mistake I made essentially with a moss ball that caused algae to just grow all over the tank. And I saw a lot of people on YouTube essentially, tying moss to sticks and creating cool mossy stuff inside of their tanks. So I thought to myself, well, hey, I have this moss ball. Let's break up the moss ball and just glue it on the wood because that'll look cool. Well, it turns out that moss ball is actually like a type of algae. And once I broke it up, gave it a ton of surface area to grow on and started fertilizing the tank and giving it a high amount of light, the moss ball just kind of exploded. And you can see there's still a ton of it on the wood, and it kind of collects around the bases of the plants sometimes. And I just cannot get rid of it. It's a little bit frustrating. I mean, I'm still super happy with the tank, don't get me wrong, but it has been one thing that has been just a constant battle with this tank. I don't think I'm going to be able to get rid of it, honestly. If I reuse stuff from this tank for the next project, I'm just going to have to be super vigilant that I get rid of all of that moss ball algae, essentially. But in the first video I made about this tank, I talked pretty extensively about the substrate and how I set that up and a mistake that I made with the crushed coral that I added. And it hasn't really been an issue. In the substrate, there are bags of aqua soil that are kind of layered on with gravel and then an absolute ton of crushed coral. Probably, I'd say like 3 times the amount that I need for this volume of water to increase the hardness slightly. So the water has been pretty hard, but it's actually been going down, which I find super interesting. And I didn't really know why this was happening until I read the Walsad method. And in that book, she talks about plants that can uptake bicarbonates, like calcium. And scientists in the comments correct me if I'm making any kind of mistakes with scientific terms, because I'm not a scientist, and I've been doing my best to learn the scientific processes that are going on in the aquarium so I can best tell them to you guys. But regardless, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. But the crushed coral in the substrate adds calcium to the water column as the water is sort of passed over it, essentially. And that calcium is a bicarbonate. And the Vallisneria spiralis in here, one of the reasons that it's doing so well is that it can use those bicarbonates, that calcium, to grow. So that's really given it an additional food source to be able to grow with. And I have a suspicion that the dwarf sage in here can do the same thing, essentially. And because those two plants have been growing just absolutely like crazy, I think that must be the answer. And I mean, why else would the overall hardness be going down if not for something in here using it? And it's possible that more than just those plants are using it. I don't think the Java fern is, because otherwise the Java fern would be doing a lot better. But those two plants have just been totally outpacing all of the other plants in here, except maybe the Bacopa is also doing well. So maybe there's something to that for the Bacopa. But it's been really interesting because I was really nervous in that first video that over time I was going to have to start over, or that it would make the water too hard for the fish, something like that, make the pH way too high. But there is a balance in here now. The hardness is going down and the plants are growing. So I think adding that crushed coral with the way that this turned out, weirdly, was kind of a blessing in disguise, because it's at like a really good equilibrium now. And I highly recommend the Walsad method if you're interested in learning about the science behind aquariums. I mean, it is a very densely scientific book, but there were a lot of parts in that book that made me sort of have a light bulb go off and a moment of understanding to better get a grasp of what's actually going on in here. So that was kind of a big revelation I had, and really relieved a lot of kind of underlying stress I was having about this aquarium. But overall, this tank just makes me super happy every day. I'm really, really pleased with the growth of everything in here, the fish and the plants, and I'm really proud of this aquarium. And it's going to be a little bit sad to take it down in a couple months, but from that, you know, something even better will come, and I'm excited to share that with you guys whenever I get there. But thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate all of you. I hope you enjoyed this look back at Cory Mountain here and the little update. I'll probably do another kind of minor one before I move in a couple of months. But thanks for coming on this journey with me. And yeah, check out the first video if you haven't seen that one. If you have any questions or anything like that, you know, let me know in the comments section. While you're there, don't forget to like and subscribe, because I really appreciate it, and it super helps me out, you know, as a small channel. But yeah, thank you guys. And for those of you who've been watching some of my more recent videos, I've been doing a lot of kind of like voiceover stuff when I'm creating new projects, because I found that it kind of helps me to focus on what I'm doing a little bit more when I can just kind of film it and then go back and do voiceover. But I'm curious about what you guys think if you've been watching for a while. Do you like that kind of voiceover stuff, or do you prefer this kind of video where I'm just sitting down and talking to you guys? Let me know in the comments, and yeah, check out my other videos. There's probably some on the screen right now. Appreciate you guys, and I'll see you in the next one.